Hello, thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I'm David Pendergrass. Today we're going to pick up where I left off last time. I was having a conversation with an online friend, Cody, about Jesus and guns. What do you think about all that?
Wow, so yeah, that's a lot. A couple of comments. I guess first, about Revelation where, the government is being driven by Satan, and then we have in Romans, we're talking about respecting the government. I think you were talking about there's a long history of this conflict going on internally with Christians about do we trust the government or not, and you can see it applied today, right? So, so what you think about guns and gun laws, to me, what Jesus would say, I don't think the right way to handle it is to enact violence and to cling to our guns and get holed up and go all David Koresh on people. It's more of a use the mechanisms provided by our government, electing, our elected officials and writing your congressmen and all that thing if you have a disagreement with the way the laws are written, you go that route versus inciting fear and anger and violence. On the flip side of that, where we find a lot of Christians and a lot of people is that they kind of see the government from the Revelation side, especially I feel like a lot of heavily conservative evangelical Christians say, well, this is of the devil. And so I think as Christians, we need to really check ourselves on that if we're doing something out of anger or hate or fear, that's absolutely not Jesus would want us to do, right?
Right.
That's what I would say about that point. So we almost treat guns like idols. We almost treat, there's some, I think you put it as unhealthy, and I think that's a good way to put it, is there is some unhealthy fear, anger, and idleness going towards firearms and gun control.
And to be clear and to be as fair as I can be, it's one issue to say that people are, like in your view, and maybe in my view too as well, clinging too much to it. And that's one issue. It's a different issue for people who cling to them, or don't cling to them, but who argue on theological grounds for that. That is to say, when a person clings very heavy to the Second Amendment right, which I'm all for defending ourselves against I really am. I'm for being able to defend ourselves against tyrants. I am for that. My only point is, if a person makes the argument and they use a Bible verse for it, that's where I want to start disagreeing with them. Does that make sense? So it's the cause, it's the motivation.
Yes, if somebody was going to install a caliphate, in the United States, I would probably have an issue with that, and I would probably, stand up, and I would see that as tyranny. Yeah, so I agree with you on that. I see it the same way. My understanding of the story where Jesus tells the disciples to go, sell their cloak and get a sword. My interpretation of that, and I don't have a huge background, obviously, in Jewish culture and history, but is that it was the Wild West out there, right? So you're going on a trail between two places, and you could get robbed, you could get killed, right? And so, these guys had the money, so, Jesus knew that they had the money in their purse, and they could be targets. So it was more of let's protect ourselves, right? So it was very logistical and very specific to that context. That's how I read it anyway. What do you think about that?
I think that's true. I might say a little more by saying that particularly because Jesus assumes the people will not be hospitable to them. There are other verses that indicate that's the case where, in other forms of this tradition, where he says, and when they don't receive you, if they don't, shake the dust off your sandals and go on. So I think here Jesus is assuming that they will not be received very well by everyone. And that's exactly why, as you said, they will be more at danger. I completely agree that he's preparing them for you're going to be more in danger. People they don't all want to hear the message. To this day, they don't either. But to be real clear, I do not think he literally meant to carry the sword to get ready to fight them. But rather, it's again hyperbole, it's parabolic. Get ready to defend yourself. You're going to have to leave. You have to defend yourself if they come to do that. Now, having said that, if a person says, no, David, I think he's saying you must defend yourself when someone attacks you for the faith. My only problem with saying that's sure interpretation is I don't know what to do with the disciples when Jesus is in fact attacked for his faith. So when he's in front of the Sanhedrin and they're slapping him and beating him, or when the Romans are beating him because he's been arrested, at no time does he grab a sword and defend himself. At no time does he tell the disciples to do that. Never. When it's the time to defend himself, he didn't defend himself. So all I'm saying, all the opportunities Jesus had to literally defend himself, he did not do it. And because of that overwhelming amount of evidence for that, I do not think when he tells him to take a sword, he really means defend himself. So by application, if we had a caliphate, let's see what happened for a second. Muslims take over. Not all Muslims, but I mean, if that happened, if the extreme kind of fundamentalists took over, should Christians grab a sword? Should we grab a gun and defend ourselves? I'm saying in the Christian worldview, Jesus does not tell us. Jesus does not tell us go defend yourself. And if there's anything at all that's by example of our Lord and Savior Jesus, it would be that we do not fight back. That to the point of death, we do not convert. We do not convert and we do not fight back.
It's interesting. So a couple things. You used to say you were quasi-pacifist, and now... So we talk about the separation of church and state, and you can do that to some extent, but my gut tells me you can't do that 100% because certain legislative things that you endorse are based on your Christian worldview and what you think is right or wrong, right? And so there's a blurry line there, right?
Well, I think I hear what you're saying. That is to say, for years I used to say, you can't legislate morality, as everyone says, until one day I tried to defend something in the government. And it just dawned on me, all legislation has moral implications. Almost everything comes from a moral place. This is not all moral, they're moral issues. Everything, whether we have the free right to own my property, or, these are moral issues. Well, I thought, that's stupid. Yes, we legislate moral issues all the stinking time, and everyone's making moral arguments, whether it's right or wrong to do something, whether it's good or bad. Those are moral categories. So I do think that the government legislates things that are morally based. Planned Parenthood, warfare, these are moral issues. Absolutely. And we should be clear about that. We should make good moral arguments. Moreover, since I'm convinced Christianity is true, we should make moral arguments based on what we think are the best Christian implications or inferences based on the Christian worldview. Absolutely. When it comes to separation of church and state, I take more of the classical understanding, which is to say, the government cannot mandate or dictate a national religion. For example, to make it illegal not to be a Christian. And if that sounds crazy, remember in the Roman Empire, for centuries, it was. Moreover, you had to be a Nicene Christian. You had to adopt the Nicene Orthodoxy, or you could be in a lot of trouble and arrested or exiled. So that's what I'm against, and that's what the separation of church and state is against. If you remember, in the original colonies, states had formal statewide religions. For example, Pennsylvania was the Quaker state. That's why the oil's called that. It was their official. Rhode Island, I think, was Baptist. The states had official denominational ties. But the government couldn't say the country had an official one. And that's what was so cool. The states wanted to decide for themselves. Of course, now we're so far away, even the states don't want to do that. We'd never, ever do that. People go up in arms to say, Texas is Baptist, or Texas is Pentecostal, whatever it is. So, and I don't think they should. So what I'm talking about separation of church and state, what seems to me a good Christian moral thing is, it does not mandate based on legal terms whether or not a person should follow a particular religion. So to be real frank with that, I think the Roman Empire, even the Roman emperors, if they were so-called Christians, were wrong to do that. I do not believe for one second, based on the teachings and example of Jesus, that discipleship is compulsory. It's not compulsory. It can't be forced. It's another issue to say that legislation is not a moral issue and it's not informed by my religious mores and beliefs. It is, and it should be. And people should just make it vocal. Obama, I don't care who it is, they should always say, look, my decision on this is blank, and I'm doing that because I'm a Muslim, I'm a Christian, I'm an atheist. They should just put it out there. And the best argument should win. Or they vote. But that doesn't mean the church should make their minds up. If every single elected official said that homosexuals should get married because we've all took a big fat vote on it, it doesn't mean for one second it changes Jesus' teaching on the issue. But what if we went to jail? What if they arrested me? David, what if I got arrested? Guess what? I just get arrested. I'm not going to do it. But David, that's your government says. Yep, but I have a different allegiance. When my government concurs with the allegiance I have with Jesus, well, then we're cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the line that you drew between the separation of church and state is that's a rational thing to say that position. You talked about I guess last thing, you talked about Jesus favoring, taking sides, and you have to pick him, or even above your family. And I think anything outside of God can be an idol, right? And even your family could be, in one sense, where you were neglecting your relationship with Christ at the expense of your family. Now, it's a weird thing to say, but and I don't know if we overwhelmingly have this problem in this country with that, but we tend to follow money and stuff, and whatever political issue that we have, that we feel really passionate about. That seems to be in line with things of this world can be idolized, and we're called not to do that no matter what, right?
Right.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, so you said you went from quasi-pacifist to now you believe that we can enact violence, but I wasn't really clear about how that coincides with your Christian worldview in the sense that, I mean, we all agree that if if I have to defend my family, I got to defend my family, I got to be violent, right? But if somebody breaks into my house, castle doctrine, here we come, right? So, but I guess the line is where do we don't ever instigate violence, right? We don't go seek it out. We don't try not to act out in terms of anger, right?
Yeah, well, it's two different issues, it seems to me. One is we don't ever enact violence. One is we don't ever do it instigated on anger. It's the second one I concur. We should not do it based on emotional reasons. We should do it based on morally rational, justified reasons. And it seems to me, and I'm not certain about this, it just seems to me that we could suggest and argue from various examples, but not really, there's not tons of them, I know that, but I think one of the theological inferences we can make is that it is Christian to defend the cause of the poor and the needy. I can go through many, many prophetic texts, many things in the New Testament. Now, then the question is, what does that mean, defend them? In the Judaism, particularly in ancient Judaism, they did not defend the cause of the needy and the poor by going and killing the bad guys, as far as we have evidence. I don't know of anywhere where they did that. Or the prophets grabbed an Uzi or grabbed a sword and said, let's go get them. But they did constantly, loudly protest what they were doing and did apparently do their best job to get them excised and expelled from leadership. They did do their best to stop the leaders doing it. In ancient Judaism, it seems to have been the case that in general, Jewish leaders cared what prophets said. That is to say, prophets had a degree of authority. Today, they don't. If I go to Rwanda, well, not I, but if our government says you can't massacre your people anymore, well, they don't respect a prophet. They'll respect a government that has our arsenal and our tanks and our drones. They will respect that. So what I'm saying is, though, this is where I tend to agree a little bit with St. Augustine with this just war theory. If we tell them to stop, these poor and needy people who are being massacred, they need to stop now, or else we will come defend them. If my tanks get in front of these people to defend them, and you get near my tanks and you start attacking me, then I'll defend us too. And to me, that's what makes it a just or righteous war. I'm there to defend. And so, can we enact violence? Yes, but that's not the same as enacting it because we're just raging. And to use it by analogy, to me, it's the analogy you give, I think the same thing. If someone comes to my home, I will not sit back idly by while they injure my family and go, hey, Jesus didn't want to hurt anybody. Jesus didn't grab a sword. Now, if I'm wrong, I'm fine with that. I'll just deal at judgment time. But I don't think I'm wrong. I just don't think I am. Then I think we make that writ large and say, I think entire countries, I think leaders violate not someone's home, but whole nations or people groups who sit by. In that sense, and I get tired of hearing this too, the United States is not the world's police. I would suggest morally we should be at times. At times, I think the right thing to do, because we can defend people, we should. Now again, because I'm a Christian. If I were an atheist, or if I were, an atheist is going to be very mad if they hear that. My point is, if I had no moral grounds to defend people, hey, survival of the fittest, get over it, well, then I wouldn't care. But that's not my view. My worldview is Christian. I think the poor and the needy and the widow should be defended. I think primarily they should be defended by our material care, our economic care and concern, our helping dig wells and build education and all kinds of stuff, and helping people have legal means to get over here if possible, to get, there's all kinds of ways that we don't have to jump to violence. All I'm saying is, I think there are times when our tanks should defend. I think it's the Christian thing to do. It's not the first thing we go to, let's go bomb them. But if I had this example, people say this all the time, would you have killed Hitler if you go back in time? Well, I think the Christian response is, if that's the only thing you could do to change history, yes, you should. If you had other options, no, you shouldn't. Here's one simple option. Talk to the people at the art school where he applied and say you need to accept Adolf Hitler. It would have changed the course of history. He would have made it to art school. That's what he wanted to do. And almost certainly he would never have gotten to government and this wouldn't have happened. Well, we don't have to kill Hitler. We don't have to hurt him at all. Just help him get accepted to school. We don't have to have him aborted. You see, my point is I don't have to enact violence. If someone came in my home, my first gut reaction, well, it might be, depends, but is not to shoot him in the head. I would like to think, at minimum, even though they're attacking my family, I want to shoot them in the leg, the arm, I want to stop them and get out of the house. That is, I want to enact the least amount of damage possible to defend my family and myself. I feel that way about governments and the state. Now, having said all that, and I'll stop there because I know this is a long issue and we could really unpack all that, but having said all that, I'm not 100% sure. I'm just not. I just think that the church should lead the way in defending the cause of the poor and needy, not the government. So I think the government can do it, but it's the church's job to do it first. We rely too much on the government to do things the church should be doing. And remember, the church used to do these things. It was the church that defended it. It was the church that started all the orphanages and the hospitals and whatever. Now the state does it, primarily. And that's why most churches have lost their true north. They just want to sit back and have a good sermon and a good logo and a good coffee and go home. But for centuries, the church was the beacon of hope for defending the right for the poor and the widow and the orphans. And so the people I fuss at the most are us, not the government. I don't want them to sit back and, it reminds me of like church welfare. And I'm not trying to dog people who genuinely need welfare. I was on food stamps for years when my mom and I were alone and we were poor. All I'm saying is, it's as if relying upon the government to do what the church is supposed to be doing in the first place, but without tanks. But imagine the difference we could make if the church united, if just one denomination united, and overwhelmingly bombarded certain countries with care and concern and schools and food, the difference we'd make. Well, let's wrap up for a second. What last things you have, we'll wrap up on this time.
Yeah, we can wrap up on this. I think, well, this is a whole different podcast, but what Jesus' position on. Well, obviously Jesus, like you said, wanted to help the poor and all that stuff. Help the poor, take care of people, materialistically, make sure they had food and a place to sleep and stuff like that. And your point about that's the church's job, it shouldn't be the government's job, is an interesting position to take. And we could, like I said, we could probably talk about that some other time. I'm still trying to process it all, but
well, let's do that if you want. Well, why don't we? We'll wrap up now, and maybe next time we can chat more about it if you'd like to. Thanks so much, Cody. God bless you, brother. Have a great day, and talk to you soon.
Yeah, you too.
All right, bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you want more, go to davidpendergrass.com, davidpendergrass.com. If you look at the top, you'll see various tabs that have sermons I've preached, a link to all the podcasts I've done so far, a link to my consulting website. For more information about my consulting, see davidpendergrassconsulting.com. Also, you'll see information about the books I've written that are found on amazon.com. So davidpendergrass.com, one-stop shop, all that you need. If you want to reach out to me, follow me on Twitter, at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass, and send me a message. I'll see you online.